Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Our Lady, seat of wisdom.
Pray for us.
May the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Who's doing this? Do you know? Huh? Happy past, miserable present. Nice.
You gotta take a pause real quick.
Oh yeah. What's this? I like that. Good for you. I thought that's what it was. Okay. So now we're going to finish Job's speech, his conclusion. As I go back, I'm just going to go back really briefly to look where we go, because I think there's a couple different ways we can read this. So we ended up with right here, back all the way back in 25, we had Bildad's really short little speech, looked like it was abridged, and he made reference to like almost like the war in heaven, which some people said like probably some people actually take this and put up in Bildad. I do not recommend doing that. I think we can interpret this thusly. This and also Job's next speech, which doesn't seem to have a lot of continuity with other things he said. I think one way we can read this is that Bildad is starting to talk, and he talks about peace in heaven. He starts talking about the moon and the stars. And Job cuts him off. He knows he has nothing to learn from Bildad, and he's going to show that by his speech. He basically uses Bildad's words, and he talks about actually the whole cosmic battle in explicit detail, and he also makes reference to various things that are shown up here. He does talk about the moon, which is up here, and so anyway, I think you find cross themes in these two speeches, but it's almost as if Job cuts Bildad short, finishes his monologue for him. Zophar, then, we can imagine trying to pipe up, and then Job gives 27, okay? Which, there's really no problem. A lot of this makes sense, but then when you get over here, it's like, this is almost like opposite of what Job says in chapter 24, which is that wicked people don't get punished. Well, here it's all about how the wicked do get punished. All these people who do wicked things to widows, and people who collect money, the hoarders, they all end up getting punished here. So it's like, well, where are your consistencies at? I mean, the church fathers will, since Job says nothing wrong, the church fathers will explain this by saying, okay, well, it depends when you mean punishment. Is it before death or is it after death? Okay, so there's a truth. You can interpret this truly. The only problem with that is nowhere in our text does it ever really make it explicit when they're talking about people getting punished. So in the literal sense, you have to read into it. Either you're going to assume Job says, my recorder crashed. Job says that these guys get punished, and since you think Job says everything right, that means he's talking about hell, which is true. But in the literal sense of it, since it doesn't give you any clear indication what Job is talking about, it gives you other ways of interpreting this. Maybe he cuts Zophar off, and he tells you exactly what Zophar would say. I mean, that's what people tend to think, that this is Zophar's missing speech that got jumbled in transmission. No text like that exists, but why not assume this could all be done in a sarcastic tone, according to the words of Zophar. Okay? You already know how Job stands, because in chapter 24 he says, hey, people do wicked things and their lamp doesn't go out. Well, Zophar, you're not going to tell me anything new, so I'm going to just tell you what you would say, and I'm going to say it sarcastically. You could, I think, salvage this by putting these words in Job's mouth in a sarcastic tone, as if he's speaking for Zophar, who is missing. And I think, as far as our structure, Bildad being cut short, and Job actually finishing his dialogue for him in some way, and then Zophar disappearing and Job doing a 1-2 conclusion, because remember, right after this we have this interlude poem, which is a clear break, singing about wisdom. So my current theory is that we read this opposite 24 section here of the punishment of the wicked sarcastically. I mean, notwithstanding, Gregory the Great could be absolutely right. I mean, he does the same thing for Zophar or the friends when they talk about divine retribution of the wicked man. He goes, hey, in some ways they're right because it happens in hell. But in some ways they're really wrong. It doesn't always happen here on earth before death. Again, so they would interpret this by meaning all this is true. Job is talking about the afterlife. Except you don't have a clear verse there that says, in the afterlife, the wicked will be judged according to their works. It doesn't say that anywhere. So you can read into it according to the character of Job. And it's fine if you want to do that. Or you can take its ambiguity and be like, why couldn't he be talking sarcastically to Zophar? Maybe that's part of the artistry of it. It's just a theory. Then we had our interlude, which doesn't follow that chapter at all. And again, our next chapter starts with, and again, Job took up his discourse. So you have a seam here. An editor put a seam here. And so I told you, I treat this chapter 28, which is a song about wisdom, which is clearly structured. It's its own unit. It talks about, it gives mining activity here, people looking for gold, which is going to be like the favorite contrasting metaphor in the book of Proverbs for how wisdom is better than gold. Don't trust silver. So it gives you this mining activity of how hard people work to go into the dark to find gold and ore underneath mountains. And then it goes into where is wisdom found? Well, you can't dig it out of the ground. You can't go under mountains. It talked about the Tehom and the Yam, the deep, the abyss, and the sea. These two primordial kind of personas. That's definitely how the book of Job treats of the deep and the sea. They don't have wisdom at all. And then it shifts into, can you buy it with the gold? I mean, it talked about gold over here. Now it's like, can you use the gold to purchase wisdom? It says, no, no, no. And then it gives you this, then it concludes with, well, where does it come from? So we find out where gold came from, then this tells us where wisdom comes from. It comes from God. You can't have it anywhere else. Now, the interesting point is, and people see a contradiction here, which is the first thing when it goes like, where is wisdom found? Man does not know the way to it. At the conclusion, you do have God telling man what wisdom is. So then you have to assume, hey, man does know wisdom, at least in this rudimentary form. Behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. That's what we call the primary principle, the beginning, the foundation on which everything else is going to be built, of what we call wisdom, the gift of the Holy Ghost. Fear of the Lord, the first thing. Why is that the first thing? Because wisdom is the order of love. You put everything in its proper order. And this has an attending object of fear, which is to not depart from that path, to fear the loss of this order of good. Understanding is to depart from evil, is understanding. So you see the order, you got the order, I understand it. I will not deviate from it. Okay? That's the beginning of wisdom. Man knows the beginning of wisdom, but the degree and the elaboration and how it all plays out in all of our lives, we need the Holy Spirit for that one, huh? Because any particular person in their particular circumstances is going to have a different data set of order, you know? I don't have a wife to put in my order as far as like in between my relationship to God. I don't have to go through. My relationship to God is like immediate. I don't have a hierarchy of duties. I don't serve God through that relationship, wife. I serve it through my relationship as priest to people, okay? That's why I can't, especially according to my role. It's one of the hierarchy of goods. Like there's an order to what you're supposed to do, and you can't deviate from it. Good example, like I can't, now hey, I'm but a man, and I do have a limit, but I can't decide, you know what? For the next month, I'm just going to sit in my rectory and meditate all day long. Don't knock. I throw away my phone, don't call. You need something? Go somewhere else. That would be, now I'd be talking to God. Is that a good thing? Praying, is that a good thing? Yeah. But am I doing something disordered? Absolutely, because I have duties according to where I am. Now, you see how this starts playing out in your own lives? Huh? You can't, like, stop doing your duties, even if they are religious duties, while you neglect your more fundamental ones. Your family, your spouse, your children. You can't say we're all just going to go to adoration every day and then, like, no one has dinner anymore. Like, that's not how you serve God. That's not your... Wisdom sees the order of everything and seeks that path. And the virtue of hope is very important, because if you don't have hope, you can't have fear of the Lord, because if you don't have hope, you're not on any path. You can't achieve the greatest good. The thing that wisdom is like pointing you towards, like the beatific vision, that divine knowledge. If that's not attainable, you're not on the path, so how can you abandon it? Hope means you're on the path going to a destination and it's attainable, which is why you would fear deviating from it. If you don't have hope, you can't fear deviating from it because you have no access to the path. That's an important thing too, because Job, I think, has demonstrated actually a certain progression of hope. Now, Job doesn't know what the heck is going on, it seems to me, because he kind of oscillates a lot. And, you know, and St. Thomas does talk about how Job is like, one of the reasons why the book of Job exists is to demonstrate that Stoicism is wrong, because Job really does emote. And St. John Chrysostom, in his commentary on Job, I gave you that citation, how he talks about Job has a frame of mind of someone suffering, and that, like, certain things have to be worked out when you're suffering. One thing that Job has been consistent on is that God is all-powerful and is the origin and generator of everything, and that he's innocent. He doesn't know actually what he's supposed to be doing. Now, the main theme, and this is important because we're about to go to his conclusion, the main theme that has kind of tracked through Job, one of the main themes among everything, is his court case. And this is why the Jewish philosopher Leibniz came up with the whole concept of theodicy from the book of Job, like God on trial. The divine justice, is it just? You know, God's on trial, theodicy. Job wants to go to court. Okay, I think it's like in chapter 9 where he first speculates about his court case. Yeah, it's 9, where he talks about, you know, can I go up and do court? And he talks about how, but there's no umpire between me and God. And he basically says, if I do, I will be condemned by my act of doing it. Well, he kind of progresses beyond that speculative, because when you get that line about he will take his flesh into his own teeth, and though he strike me, I will trust in him. When that line comes in, that's in chapter 13, he says, I'm now going to present my case. He abandons the speculative. He goes, I'm going to God, and I'm going to talk to him. And he challenges God. He goes, speak, and I will listen. Or, I will speak, and you reply. Well, God is silent on both ends of that, okay? Job, dramatic pause, listens. God doesn't defend his action. So Job then explains his case, and he waits for the reply, and instead he gets stuck with Eliphaz, okay? We all love Eliphaz. You know, I love Eliphaz. So yeah, that was in chapter 13. So he progresses into his court case. And now, and he had a lot of legal image around, a lot. He does talk about, remember, in chapter 16, he goes, even now, behold, my witness is in heaven, and he that vouches for me is on high. Like he believes, he's still like in this trial thing, and he has like a witness keeping track of his integrity through this whole dark period where he's talking with his friends, and he doesn't know, as he's trying to figure out what to do. It seems he gets a little bit more courage when we have that really famous line in chapter 19 where he talks about verse 23 to 27. And this again is legal. He really wants. He goes, "Oh, that my words were written. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book. Oh, that with iron pen and lead they would be graven in the rock forever." He wants definitive testimony of what he's saying to persist, even after God strikes him for taking him to trial, possibly. But he wants this book to exist that we're reading, which is his struggle of what to do when you're miserable, okay? Or how to justify oneself in the face of the world, how to deal with human suffering. He wants his testimony inscribed. And this is where you get that real strong verse which the Christians like ran with, like he's looking forward to Christ himself. Verse 25 of chapter 19, "For I know that my Redeemer lives, and at last he will stand upon the earth, and after my skin has been thus destroyed, then from my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see on my side, and my eyes shall behold, and not another. My heart faints within me." He faints at such a glorious vision. But it's clear. He's like, he will see God with his flesh after his skin, after his life has been destroyed, after my skin has thus been destroyed. So it seems like he's hinting at a sort of resurrection, like God cannot let injustice persist, and since I'm innocent, I will behold my God. Okay? So he does seem to have a confidence, growing confidence, as we enter into his concluding remarks. And his concluding remarks is going to be legal. Okay? So I want to go back to this. When I gave a homily 2 weeks ago, this dawned on me. I used an example about fear of the Lord, okay, and how we need to have fear of the Lord. And I described two different types of fear. And there is a fear that you have, which is found in Genesis chapter 3. That's when Adam hears God walking. And that fear does what? It causes him to run away. Okay. We have not gotten that from Job at all. If anything, he's tentative towards the beginning, but he doesn't have a disordered fear of God because he wants to go in front of God's face. He wants to go to God for his knowledge, for his vindication. He trusts in his integrity, his innocence. He knows he's not conscious of any sin. So he doesn't have a disordered fear. And if he has been integrity, if he has not misstepped or anything, he does have a true fear of the Lord, the proper kind, which is to avoid sin. But fear of God is not to not want to look at God. That's why I talked about the whole virtue of hope thing. Like, you want to look at God. You want to go to God. And fear of the Lord is not wanting to not ever lose that by sinning. That's fear of the Lord. Not running and hiding from him like he's some tyrant. Even though a lot of Job's language is of God as a warrior, like destroying him and piercing him with a sword, in spite of his perception or how he describes how God has destroyed his life, Job doesn't fear God as if God is his true enemy. He still wants to appear before God for his vindication. There's something this is a very strong testimony to Job's search for wisdom with the true fear of the Lord. Okay. Now, this is going to properly be his conclusion, chapter 29. 29, 30, 31. We can call this the tripartite conclusion of Job. It's clearly three parts. It's kind of integral. 29 flows right into 30, and 31 is his grand climax. Okay, and we're going to treat of these three chapters tonight. Again, our narrator gives us a seam line. And Job again took up his discourse and said, Oh, that I were as in the months of old, as in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shone upon my head, and by his light I walked through darkness. As I was in my autumn days, when the friendship of God was upon my tent, when the mighty was yet with me, when my children were about me, when my steps were washed with milk, and the rock poured out of me streams of oil. Okay, I'm going to seam that right there, okay? This is his vision of his idyllic past, okay? This is Job remembering the days of yore. This is previous. This is not writing right. I didn't spell. What happened there? Previous blessing. These are the blessings of his previous age. Okay? Chapter 29 is going to have a fourfold division. The next one's actually going to be right here. And the next one's above 18. And 21. Let me see if I wrote how to do this. His previous blessing, previous honor. We're going to spell it the American way. Job's justice. Future blessing. Past honor. Okay. So, if I wanted to schematize it, I don't know why I'm kind of cropping this thing a little bit. If I want to schematize this, it's going to look something like this. It will be, this is A, B, C, A, B, A prime, B prime. Okay? So it's not chiastic where it forms a loop. Okay? It doesn't go A, B, C, B, A. It doesn't form a nice ring. It's rather, it's a sequence. You can call it a serial, it's a serial structure with a hinge. Okay, so it goes A, B, C, and then it repeats the pattern. Some people will call this like a concentric pattern, where it does something like this, okay? Where you have C over here, A, B, and then it like repeats, A, B, and it's loop around. Okay. It's a kind of a it's not super like rare. That does exist in Scripture and other places. So, but this is our pattern, at least for chapter 29. As he describes his happy days of yore. Now, I would have us pause and think for a second. We can see the pattern. It does A deals with blessings. Okay. Now, this is a past tense blessings. How great his days were before when he had kids playing and he had great. Exuberant wealth pictured by like oil flowing from a rock and curds. On the back side of our hinge, which is going to be C, is going to be the future blessing he was going to be expecting from his righteous life. Okay? One of the blessings he had from his past was the honor that he had by all of his neighbors. Everybody praised Job for his integrity and his judgment. How Job exercise that judgment is what is section C. This is where he talks about how he meted out perfect justice to people who are oppressed. Okay. Then he deals, okay, this is the fruits of doing that kind of justice. Then instead of future honor, okay, he jettisons it. He doesn't do future honor again. He doesn't do future honor. You're kind of expecting future honor, but it doesn't come. Instead, he goes back to the past honor, almost like he's already resigned to the fact that he's going to leave this world and nobody's ever going to honor him again. Okay? Because they have a bad outlook on life and himself, meaning he suffers because he's wicked. So let's not honor him. That's how he ends. Now, I hypothesize You can throw this one away. I hypothesize you kind of want to see. Okay. Job's justice. There's a reason why that's in the middle, because we're all wondering what's the justice of God for Job? He suffers. So we really want, especially in light of like past honor, Job's not going to get honor in the future, and he definitely didn't get his blessings that he expected, which is why this shows I was going to get this, but then instead I lack honor, so let's just remember my past honor. What we're looking for is God's justice. And I think we should read the next chapter with that light, okay? When Job then talks about his miserable present, okay? But that's what we're thinking about. It's like, where's God's justice in this? So now let's look at our text. Now I have like tons of notes on all this, but I have to like be kind of quick about it. Some things that will confuse you maybe. You should be able to pick up the residences on your own. As far as him talking about a lamp on top of his head. Remember, just like last cycle, they actually were talking about how the lamp of the wicked is put out. So Job is using language that we've already encountered in the previous monologues. I was in my autumn days, like in English idiom, that makes us think of like end life. Okay, that's not how it's being used here. Autumn days is being used here. Most modern, the new RSV will actually translate it this way. They'll put like, in my prime. Okay. Like maturity. Job doesn't want to go back to like childhood innocence. It's like my maturity. That was the best part of my life. When I was a competent individual who succeeded, and I had my children around me, and I walked by the light of God, by the law of God. My prime days. Autumn was like the final harvest for the Hebrews, but they also immediately like started furrowing the ground again. They started doing their agricultural activity for the next season at the same time. So the winter months is actually the beginning and the end of the growth cycle, in a certain sense. Okay, it's not like Nebraska, where all of a sudden like the whole ground freezes or something. You have to wait for two months. Actually, the book of Proverbs, I might not have that citation here. Let's see if I do. Yeah, Proverbs 20, verse 4. Actually, we'll talk about how the sluggard does not plow after the harvest. It's referring to he doesn't start his work after the autumnal harvest. So Proverbs 20, verse 4 talks about that. I would say also on this, rock here, I think, is probably also a veiled reference to God. Okay, God. One of God's names actually is like God, my rock. That's a divine epitaph. Okay, so like the rock that poured out streams of oil. It's kind of a hard image to figure out. As you can see from this picture, we don't understand how oil comes out of rock, but the rock of this image could possibly be talking about when God poured out blessings upon me, because I'm not getting that right now. Okay. Now we get him going to his previous honor, okay? When I went out to the gate of the city, when I prepared my seat in the square, then young men saw me and withdrew, and the aged rose and stood. Okay, this is a culture that values gray hair, okay? Young men see Job, and they make way for him. And Job is considered to be so wise that even old men stand up in respect. Now, the gate of the city, that is where trials and disputes are settled, okay? That is like the Roman Forum in a certain way. So that's the picture that you're thinking about. You're thinking of like patriarchal Job walking to the place where all the important people are, and when he gets there, all the unimportant people like part like the Red Sea, and the really important people, the pillars of the community, actually stand up to acknowledge him. That was Job's past. The princes refrained from talking and laid their hand on their mouth. Laid their hand on their mouth. This is an image that we've seen before, where Job actually yelled at his friends. He's like, look at me and be appalled. Lay your hand upon your mouth. It was used as like the gaping mouth of like horror, okay, at the sight of Job with his scabby body and his arms flinging around. Like, look at me and be appalled. The putting the hand over the mouth, I said, was also kind of equivocal. Like, it could be like, silence yourself, because the book of Job uses it this way. And here is our first instance of that. It will be used this way again at the end of the book of Job, where Job himself will lay his hand over his mouth when God talks to him. The book started in silence, and it's going to end in silence too. Let me see if I have my past citations on this. Unlike his friend, 21:5. That's where I'm going with that. Okay. Also, this is something to pay attention to as we go forward in your own. With this verse is going to start what I will call anatomical image. Okay, we're going to have our poet is going to really focus on like anatomy, and so we should pay attention to some of this stuff. Okay, so princes refrained from talking and laid their hand on their mouth. The voice of nobles was hushed, and their tongue cleaved to the roof of their mouth. When the ear heard it, it called me blessed, and when the eye saw it, it approved. Job's justice. Why did the hand cover the mouth? Why did the tongue cleave to the roof? Why did the ear hear and call you blessed? And why did the eye see approvingly? Because I delivered the poor who cried, the fatherless who had none to help him. The blessing of him who was about to perish came upon me, and I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. So it picks up our anatomy again. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. That line actually is it's used by Isaiah a couple times. It's also used by St. Paul, put on the breastplate of justice. My justice was like a robe and a turban. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was a father to the poor, and I searched out the cause of him who I did not know. He did it even for strangers. He didn't just like intercede and give justice to his buddies. He did it for even absolute strangers. I broke the fangs of the unrighteous and made him drop his prey from his teeth. With that verse, I hope everybody here is thinking back all the way to Eliphaz's lion image, okay? Here Job is using it again, this idea of the evil man, the man who commits injustice, the deceitful man who seeks to defraud or capture the righteous man through lies, is always likened to a lion. And it's a very common metaphor. And here you have this idea of unrighteous having fangs, and the prey are the blind and the lame and the poor, okay? And Job delivers them from the lion's mouth, okay? Something that King David will do. Future blessing, because he does all these great things. Then I thought, I shall die in my nest. I shall multiply my days as the sand. Jerome has a different word there. I think he uses date palm, but it's a sand is actually there's a the word for sand. There's a Hebrew word for phoenix. Okay, the bird that like dies but comes back to life. And it's a hominin, actually. It sounds exactly like sand. And so some people will debate that this is supposed to be multiply my days as the phoenix, meaning like he won't perish, he'd come back. Most people think that sand works, and it seems to be the more obvious. But it's important to know that, I think it's interesting to know that you could have life after death here. My roots spread out to the waters with the dew all night on my branches, my glory fresh with me, and my bow ever new in my hand. with bow, you have to think about what this means. The image of the bow, ever new, that probably has to do with the image of actually like archery. Who's an archer? Do bows lose their like what's that called? Tension? Do they lose tension over time? Yeah, and you have to like you either get a new string or you have to like steam it and put it in clamps or something. I don't know how you fix it. Now it's all like carbon and stuff. So but this bow being ever new in his hand, his bow never loses its tension. Okay, so it's always a good bow. We should be asking ourselves, like, why does he need a bow? I think it's a good question. Somebody who does this much justice and has this much honor is somebody who's going to end up with enemies. Okay? You can't be that cool and awesome and respected without, like, getting people to absolutely want what you have. Or to try to attack you in some kind of way. So it does show, like, hey, there's losers in every game. Okay? Job's gained a lot. He probably has hidden enemies. Well, his friends, he definitely thinks were hidden enemies. But that's probably why he wanted his bow ever new in his hand. It's like he'll always be able to defend himself. As far as in our monologues, I think he's done a pretty good job. Before I go to the past honor, I would like to show this beautiful kind of our anatomy image here. It started with hand, it went to mouth, it went to tongue, then it does ear and eye. It basically does like starts with the hands, then it goes through like your higher senses, right? Of speech and taste and hearing and vision. And hand you can make tactile too. You can make that touch. And it goes into the inmost part of man, okay, the heart, which also in biblical symbolism, the heart, it's not the brain, is the seat of the intellect. For the Hebrew, like the heart is the symbol of the intellect. And then it goes to eyes, and then it ends with feet. So it goes from hands to feet. It goes to the extremities, it goes to the senses, it goes to the inmost part, and it goes back. So that's the architecture of the anatomy of those verses. It's kind of, I like that kind of stuff. Architect. Okay. Past honor. Men listened to me and waited and kept silence for my counsel. After I spoke, they did not speak again, and my word dropped upon them. They waited for me as for the rain, and they opened their mouths as for the spring rain. I didn't think about this, but this is really like he's given a contrary image to his first response to Eliphaz about how his friends have like become deceitful waters that like you think they're going to be there and like you end up dying in the desert because they don't have any water. That was in chapter 6, 15 to 21. Here he's showing the opposite. Like he is a source of water for like everybody. He's a good friend. I smiled on them that had no confidence, and the light of my countenance, the light of my face, maybe his smile, his chipper attitude, they did not cast down. If someone's happy and they come up to you and they smile at you, you don't normally like, right? No one does that. You see a happy guy, you're like, I chose their way and sat as chief. I dwelt like a king among his troops. So again, the regal image. We can definitely see how the Greek tradition actually does exist in the Hebrew, except most people think he's just metaphorically speaking, but Job is always comparing himself to a king in a lot of contexts. I chose their way, I sat as chief, and I dwelt like a king among his troops, like one who comforts mourners. All of these, his three-part conclusion is actually going to all hinge around this theme. Primarily mourning. Okay? The sadness of Job is going to come out in this in a lot. Yeah. Now, I, for one, in these two sections, let me see if I can't figure this out, of B and B prime, of previous honor and past honor, I actually see a correspondence of the images laid out for us. in reverse order. Let me see if I can't see this. So, you start with, okay, I chose their way and sat as chief. That's how we ended this section. How does that one start? I prepared my seat in the square. I went out to the city gate, I chose their way, and then he prepared his seat. He sits as chief here, okay? I smiled on them when they had no confidence, and the light of my countenance they did not cast down. Young men saw me and withdrew, and the aged rose and stood. Okay, but they saw him and withdrew. Now he does the opposite here. When people see him, they don't withdraw from him on this side of the equation. They would be drawn to him. They would look up at him. They waited for me as the rain. They opened their mouths as spring rain. The princes refrained from talking and laid their hand on their mouth. So over on that side, you had princes covering their mouth, and here they were gaping open, like trying to drink it up. You can see that it's actually creating the same thing, just in a reverse order. After I spoke, they did not speak again, and my word dropped upon them. The voice of the nobles was hushed, and their tongue cleaved to the roof of their mouth. Men listened to me and waited and kept silent from my counsel. When the ear heard, it called me blessed. And when the eye saw, it approved. Okay? So you can see how the poet has a structure to it. That's part of his artistry. It's a very complex system, but I think when you see those kind of correspondence, you're really supposed to be considering their juxtapositions, and really it's highlighting the central terms too, this whole idea of Job's justice, which then throws us right into C. But now they make sport of me, men who are younger than I, whose fathers I would have disdained to set with the dogs of my flock. Okay, so Job is hitting kind of hard. These people who used to be waiting on every word that would come from Job's mouth, these men who used to respect him so much. Now Job is going to start telling us what he actually thinks of these people. And if you attack someone's father that much, well then they're doubly bad, okay? Because that's where you came from. So his fathers, he wouldn't have even put, his dogs were smarter. He wouldn't let the fathers walk with the dogs guarding the flock, because he probably confused the dogs, okay? What could I gain from the strength of their hands? Men whose vigor is gone. Okay? Since they lack all industry, since they have no sense of a well-ordered life, everything they touch crumbles. Now he's going to actually, and this is a really hard image, especially when you just heard him how he used to intervene on behalf of the poor. He's going to describe these people as very poor people, with contempt. And so, people who romanticize poverty as it's always Christ said, love the poor. Well, then that means, did St. Paul sin when he talked about, if you can work, if you don't work, you don't eat? Is he being mean to the poor when St. Paul says that in Thessalonians? Because there's an injustice going on. You don't just romanticize lack of material sustenance. There has to be a cause of it. Is it a cause that could be prevented? Is it coming from circumstance, or is it coming from their own will? Okay? Two different attitudes should flow from those two things. Because if it comes from their own will, facilitating it is actually facilitating their disorder. Actually, yeah, okay. So that's how I'm going to justify Job. I don't think he's just being hypocritical here or losing himself. He already says they're not even they're worthless people. They confuse dogs. They don't know how to work. And this is the effect of that. Through want and hard hunger, they gnaw the dry and desolate ground. Okay, nothing grows for them, so they eat dirt. Okay. They pick mallow and the leaves of bushes, and to warm themselves, the roots of the broom. Okay. They're digging up digging up roots on the things that they're like gnawing. They're so close to the ground. Almost like swine do. Have you ever seen like swine like actually like knock over stuff and like the roots come up and they'll like gnaw on the root, you know? Well, these guys like do the same thing. And then like they're like, oh, it's kind of cold. Let's like use these roots for like warming ourselves. They are driven out from among men. They shout after them as after a thief. Okay? So these men are pariahs. Last chapter, Job showed how he came in and everybody like honored him. These men, the people who are mocking him now, are like this, where they're like pariahs. They're among the bushes, in the gullies of torrents, they must dwell. In holes of the earth and of rocks, they have no houses. They're out in the extremities. They're in the highways and byways because they've been chased out of the town because they've been ejected from the town because they're seen as a parasite on the town. Among the bushes, they bray. Okay, the last time we got that word was when Job likened himself to a donkey. Hey, does not a donkey know its fodder? Does it brays when it needs food? Well, these guys are like donkey's brain. Okay, they're the wild jackass in the wilderness, making bleating noises. I'll give you that citation. I like that citation. 46:5. Okay. A senseless and disreputable brood, they have been whipped out of the land. Okay, that's how they were treated, okay, these men who are now mocking him. And now I have become their song. I am a byword to them. Okay, so Job is like the double pariah, okay? His enemies are these people, who everybody's an enemy of them, and these people now are Job's enemies, which means the entire world's against Job, if you want to think about it that way. They abhor me and keep aloof from me. They do not hesitate to spit at the sight of me, because God has loosed my cord and humbled me. Loosed my cord. There's a variances in the, where was that at? There's a variances in the text on that. This translation chooses a middle for you. This could be translated as like a tent cord, okay? Or it could be translated as a bowstring, okay? I think it's the bowstring because of our previous, in chapter 29, he talked about how he was supposed to have this bow that like was always fresh. Well, God has made him weak, and so he can't fend off these enemies who now abhor him and mock him. They have cast off restraint in my presence. Nothing holds these guys back. On my right hand, the rabble rise. They drive me forth. They were driven out of the cities. Now they drive Job forth. They cast up against me their ways of destruction. They break upon my path. They promote my calamity. No one restrains them. As through a wide breach they come. So Job is likening himself to this, like kind of like a city or something with walls. And they're like outright the barbarian horde attacking his city. And the walls are crumbling. And this is an image too that he pulled from previously also. I didn't put that one on there. Terrors are churned upon me. My honor is pursued as by the wind, and my prosperity has passed away like a cloud. And now my soul is poured out within me. Days of affliction have taken hold of me. The night racks my bones, and the pain that gnaws me takes no rest. With violence and seizes my garment. It binds me about like a collar of my tunic. Again, he gives you this image of now his clothes are becoming oppressive. You should be thinking actually, previous chapter, he had this great turban and beautiful robes, clothed in righteousness and justice. Well, how it's like completely, all that's been stripped away from him. God has cast me into the mire. I have become like dust and ashes. When Job did his speculative court case in chapter 9, before he did it, he said what would happen if he did do it. What did he say? He said, I have become afraid of all my sufferings, for I know that you will not hold me innocent. I shall be condemned. Why then do I labor in vain? If I wash myself with snow, cleanse my hands with lye, yet you will plunge me into a pit, into the mire, and my own clothes will abhor me. That's 9:28 to 31. Okay, now at the conclusion, he basically says, like, this has happened. I'm there. What I speculate about, well, I gave it my best, I'm in the pit. Okay? I cry to you, and you do not answer me. I stand, and you do not heed me. Again, remember when he decided to go to court, and he said, speak, and I will listen, or I will speak, and you respond. Right there. Didn't happen. And consider it in juxtaposition with the previous chapter too. When Job spoke, everybody listened. Not only that, they stood up when he sat down. Like Job is crying, and he stands, and he speaks. Silence, silence, silence. You have turned cruel to me. With the might of your hand, you persecute me. Persecute, this is also this is definitely I should use a red there. This is an echo, or this is a reference to ha-satanan, the adversary. It's coming from the same root, the Hebrew word. So like the adversary, or Satan from the prologue, like that's built into that word right there. But he's talking about the effects of his trial with God in his life thus far. You lift me up on the wind. You make me ride on it. You toss me about in the roar of a storm. He's using mythic language with this. Okay, like this is storm god imagery here that he's applying onto Yahweh. This being on the wind and riding on it, roar of the storm. Yes, I know that you will bring me to death and to the house appointed for all the living. Yet, does not one in a heap of ruins stretch out his hand and in disaster cry for help? He gives a certain, after going through that very depressing image of how God's now persecutes him and he's going to go to death, he gives you this like question mark of hope. Hope never goes completely away for Job. He's always there as he oscillates between his misery or whatnot. And again, this is biographical right here. This heap of ruins. Okay, we had this image of Job as city over here. He's now describing himself as a heap of ruins. So the barbarian horde came into the town, destroyed everything, looted all the goods, and what's left is the smoldering ruins. And that's Job's life. Okay. And he cries for help. Huh? Did not I weep for him whose day was hard? Was not my soul grieved for the poor? And Job says, hey, I heard the cries of the poor. I had sorrow for them. If I was like that, how can God not be like that? But when I looked for good, evil came. When I waited for light, darkness came. My heart is in turmoil and is never still. Days of affliction come to meet me. I go about blackened, but not by the sun. I stand up in the assembly and cry for help. I'm a brother of jackals and a companion of ostriches. My skin turns black and falls from me, and my bones burn with heat. My lyres turn to mourning, and my pipe to the voice of those who weep. In the previous chapter, it concluded with how he comforted those who are mourning. In the end of his second part of his conclusion, he talks about how his voice has joined in with the mourners. Okay? This image of him blackened but not by the sun. It's probably referring to him wearing funeral clothes. He's like at his own funeral type image, I think. He's wearing black. He's in mourning. I'm a brother of jackals, a companion of ostriches, verse 29. That's definitely referring to him being isolated out in the wilderness. He is the ultimate pariah. Okay? Like his enemies, fathers, he wouldn't put with dogs. Well, Job ends up being a companion, brothers with jackals. Okay? So even though we thought he insulted the buddy's father's really bad, like Job's is actually worse. Okay? Yeah, poor old Job. Then you get 31. This is the final section of Job here. I should say before we move to 31, just really quick, so you can mark this. There is a structure really quick. It is very identifiable in the Hebrew. It's actually the same phrase is repeated 3 times. It's but now, and now, and now. There's this tripartite structure. Okay? There's a clear progression of his misery in chapter 30. And the conclusion matches with 29. I'm sorry. Do you need to see that again? Verse 1, verse 9, and verse 16 are your editorial, the literal senses framing devices for dividing up that text. Chapter 31 is going to be, again, this is this final thing. This is not probably, it's a monologue, but this is a legal structure. This is Job's last, final, closing argument. And it resembles actually things that we find in both Babylonian and Egyptian texts. Okay? Which in the Babylonian text, it's actually in the Code of Hammurabi, it's a series of curses for certain crimes done. The curses spoken of here in chapter 31 have resonances with what you would find in the Babylonian legal texts. In Egypt, these kinds of curses, if I have done this, let this happen, meaning they're supposed to be proclamations of the person's innocence, was found actually in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Okay? And it was actually part of the ritual of what they would do for the Pharaoh in order to get him to go through the night and go to a blessed afterlife. It would help facilitate his innocence after death. I think in the conclusion of Job, the fact that he's going to use sort of this format is kind of interesting. And you could use it as an argument for him being treated or maybe thought of as Job being a persona mortis, okay? Which I think would be that's like a PhD paper right there, I think. You know, Job as the personification of a dead man. I have made a covenant with my eyes. How then could I look upon a virgin? What would be my portion from God above, and my heritage from the Almighty on high? Does not calamity befall the unrighteous, and disaster the workers of iniquity? Does not he see my ways and number all my steps? The look upon a virgin is confusing. Okay? And I'll come back to this. If I have walked with falsehood, and my foot has hastened to deceit, let me be weighed in a just balance, and let God know my integrity. His reference right here to just balance is also Job himself recognizing the disorderedness of the imbalanced scales. Okay, people who cheat in economics, which is like a serious crime, is in like Leviticus, is in Deuteronomy, it's all over the Old Testament. Don't use weighted scales. A weighted scale is an abomination to God. Job he's like, yeah, I don't believe in weighted scales. I believe in a truly just scale, which means when there's nothing on it, it's going to be balanced, right? And his righteousness, he can be held in that, okay? And it won't tip. Actually, I think the Egyptian concept of the dead, when you went to the god of the dead, he would like put your heart on a scale and it had to be lighter than the feather on the other side or something? Whoa. Okay. I don't know how they ever passed that test. Okay. Where am I at? If my step turned aside from the way, and my heart has gone after my eyes, and if any spot has clung to my hands, then let me sow and another eat, and let what grows for me be rooted out. There's going to be 4 consequences that he uses, like actual pronouncements of like punishment. Let this happen to me. He's going to use it 4 times. If my heart has been enticed to a woman. Okay. So you have these two, it's almost like a repeat here. I would say if the first verse is, I look upon a woman, a virgin, you do see a progression through these 2 things. The first one is his uprightness is so much that not even with his eyes would he love after a virgin. And then he carries it, he telescopes it, not just a virgin, but also a woman, okay? And it's not just with my eyes, but with my heart. So you see a progression of senses, from eyes to heart, from young lady to adult. Now, what could be going on here, and I would argue this, is that the metaphoric sin used to describe idolatry is adultery, okay? And I think this is probably a reference, especially since what follows is how his portion with God above. This is a reference to, I think, not going after a false god. I think that's what this first verse is about. But you could read it either way. If my heart has been enticed by a woman, and I have lain in wait at my neighbor's door, then let my wife grind for another, and let others bow down upon her. That's a very violent pun. I'll let you guys figure that one out. For that would be a heinous crime. That would be an iniquity to be punished by the judges. For that would be a fire which consumes unto Abaddon, the place of destruction. And it would burn to the root all my increase. Okay? If I rejected the cause of my manservant or my maidservant, when they brought a complaint against me, what then shall I do when God rises up? When he makes inquiry, what shall I answer him? Did not he who made me in the womb make him? And did not one fashion us both, fashion us in the womb? Here Job shows the value of all men, be him a manservant or the master, because they all come from the same womb. Actually, I think it's probably a reference to like the primary parents. We're all mankind. We're all part of mankind. If I have withheld anything that the poor desired, or have caused the eyes of the widow to fail, or have eaten my morsel alone, and the fatherless has not eaten of it. He's eaten by himself when there's people hungry outside. For from his youth, this is in parentheses, even in this translation, because nobody knows how to translate it. So let's just do this thing. For from his youth I reared him as a father, and from his mother's womb I guided him. If I have seen one perish for lack of clothing, or a poor man without covering, if his loins have not blessed me, and if he was not warmed with the fleece of my sheep, if I have raised my hand against the fatherless, because I saw help in the gate, then let my shoulder blade fall from my shoulder, and let my arm be broken from its socket. What is that? That's what we call that's like straight from like Dante's Inferno. That's what you call a contrapassio. Because what is it? What's the crime? If I raise my hand against an orphan, then let my shoulder come out of its socket and my arm break. Like the instrument that he was performing an injustice is exactly the form of the punishment. It's a lex talionis, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. You hit with your hand, you lose your hand. Or in this case, shoulder, socket. So Hey, his final salvo has some serious energy to it. He has this if I have made gold my trust, or called fine gold my confidence, if I have rejoiced because of my wealth was great, or because my hand has gotten much, if I have looked at the sun when it shone, or the moon moving in splendor, and my heart has been secretly enticed, and my mouth has kissed my hand. This is definitely a reference, I think, to pagan worship of the sun and moon. Okay? And that's why idolatry and adultery are they're in the background of this. This also would be an iniquity, to be punished by the judges, for I should have been false to God above. He would have broken faith with God above. And look at the punishment it gives you. This also would be an iniquity. That is actually the same punishment. It's the same verbiage that it uses right here in 11, okay? Which is the crime for the man committing adultery. In verse 11. In verse 11. For that would be a heinous crime. That would be iniquity to be punished by the judges. For that would be fire which consumed unto Abaddon. So adultery and idolatry, he uses the same descriptive punishment. I really think it's because adultery is the natural sign. At least it's the sign that Scripture uses in order to illustrate breaking faith from God. Because your relationship with God is one of matrimony. Everybody. Okay? If I have rejoiced at the ruin of him that hated me, or exalted when evil overtook him. This is really unique for the Old Testament. Now, Job, him going into the crimes he hasn't committed, this is going into places that the Old Testament doesn't go. Because you read the Psalter and people let me exalt over the destruction of my enemies. You get that language all the time. Which is why some Christians actually will interpret Job's final testament of actually a prefigurement of the Beatitudes themselves, like the Sermon on the Mount. Because the integrity that he lays out far excels anything that you find in the very shadowy, material, carnal Old Testament. Okay? Especially that line. If I have rejoiced at the ruin of him that hated me, if I rejoiced at the destruction of an enemy, okay, or exalted when evil overtook him, I have not let my mouth sin by asking for his life with a curse. If the men of my tent have not said, who is there that has not been filled with his meat? This seems to be the crime here seems to be of cannibalism. Okay? I don't know what to make of it, though. The sojourner has not lodged in the street, and I've opened my doors to the wayfarer. If I have concealed my transgressions from men, by hiding my iniquity in my bosom, because I stood in great fear of the multitude, and the contempt of families terrified me, so that I kept silent and did not go out of doors. Oh, that I had one to hear me. Here is my signature, let the Almighty answer me. Oh, that I had the indictment written by my adversary. Okay? So he's signing his document. I've done nothing. Okay? And remember, words are magical here. If he has done something, these destructive curses are going to come upon him. He's challenging it all. Okay? And he's doing it out loud in the face of his court, which are the three friends. Surely I would carry it on my shoulder. I would bind it on me as a crown. I would give him an account of all my steps. Like a prince, I would approach him. The him is God. I'm so sure I would approach him as a prince, head up. If my land has cried out against me, this goes back to crimes here. If my land has cried out against me, and its furrows have wept together. If I have eaten its yield without payment and caused the death of its owners, let thorns grow instead of wheat, and foul weeds instead of barley. The words of Job are ended. The words of Job are ended. Our third chapter of his conclusion ends. Job comforted mourners. Then he became the accompaniment music to mourners. And now even his own land joins him in his weeping. He's one with the land, mourning. Now there are numerous ways people like count all these curses. There's different counts will give you like 14. So it's like 7 times 2, but it's not consistent. It depends on like how you want to manipulate it. But there are 7 general categories. And I'll just show you that like from 5 to 8, he deals with deceit. Okay, that's where the scales and the tipping. Then he deals with adultery. That's from 9 to 12. And then he deals with mistreatment of servants, okay, which is 13 through 15. And then he deals with mistreatment of poor, okay, that's from 16 to 23. And then it's trust in gold, that's verse 24 to 28. Then it's rejoicing at someone else's misfortune, that's verse 29, all the way to 34. And then from verse 38 to 40, it has to do with assaulting and stealing land, okay, doing violence to land. So you can end up with 7 sections of crimes cataloged, okay, it's 7 sections in this final testament. Now, I'll leave you with this. Here is my signature, let the Almighty answer me. Like the Vulgate doesn't say that there. The Vulgate has a really confusing verse there because I don't think Jerome knew what to do with this. The Hebrew, like literally says, here is my Tav. Okay? Tav is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. This is how you write Tav. Tav is like this. Okay, that's a little Tav. What most people, this is my mark, is how you could put it. This is my signature. Like make your mark, put your X on it. Okay? So here's my Tav. He makes his mark ratifying this legal document of curses, and he shows it up. Now, this idea of this put their mark on them, this is found in Ezekiel. This is the Ezekiel. Go about and put, the Greek says tau or tav in Hebrew on their forehead. Go around and mark the people with tav. Does anybody know that from Ezekiel? It's quoted by John in the Apocalypse when the angel has to go seal the 144,000 with the mark. Okay? Does that sound familiar? Apocalypse 6? Like everybody reads the Apocalypse. I don't know why, because I can't understand any of it. But, yes, I just want to give you the do I have it? I don't have it on here. 63, yeah, so Ezekiel 9:4 and Revelation 7:3. It's chapter 7, okay? In Middle Hebrew, like, this letter is Aramaic. Hebrew took the Aramaic or Persian, like early Persian alphabet. Hebrew adopted the Aramaic alphabet. In Middle Hebrew, Tav looked like this. Okay? And in Proto-Hebrew, it looked like this. Okay? It's a cross. Okay? If Gregory the Great had that for that verse, like, here is my cross, right, I put on my forehead, like, he would have had a field day with that. Since he allegorizes Job as Christ, like a living prophecy of Christ, who performs an act of justice by his suffering unjustly at the hands of enemies. But anyway, so here is my signature. He puts a cross. From a Christian lens, looking back on the life of Job, that's pretty cool, I think. He suffers with the mark of the cross. That's what he seals, that I have integrity, I have not sinned, though I suffer. Cross. Okay? That's definitely a spiritual sense, but it's pretty cool. And then the words of Job are ended. This actually is a pun it uses the same root for integrity. And remember, the prologue all talked about, would he still keep his integrity? Would it still keep his integrity? And the whole idea of Job is that he's trying to justify that he has kept his integrity. He has not sinned. Integrity and complete, the word for ended here, use the same Hebrew root. So Job has maintained his integrity through his thing. His mark is the cross, and he has said, and the narrator tells you, and his words too have been complete, have been maintained integrity. We will continue next time with Elihu. Random new character. Love him. Okay. Let us stand. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Benedictio Deum Tentis, in Patris et Filii Spiritus Sanctus, et super vos et manis semper.